A senior State Department official has resigned following a scathing internal memo denouncing the Biden administration's use of Title 42 to expel migrants at the southern border in the name of public health. Harold Koh, whose tenure with state started in 2009, wrote that the use of Title 42 violate our legal obligation not to expel or return individuals who fear persecution, death, or torture, especially migrants fleeing from Haiti, and that lawful, more humane alternatives plainly exist.
And one little clarification that he actually even worked in the Clinton State Department, but was a senior official in the Obama State Department. Here to discuss is Nomiki Kantz, director at Matriarch and former candidate for New York City public advocate, and Rachel Bovard, senior director of policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning, guys.
So Nomiki, the Biden administration has extended, what is essentially a Stephen Miller brainchild, to say that the administration can kind of run some of its immigration policy through pandemic policy, and can kind of use the language that people like Miller have loved for so long, that that immigrants are bringing disease and they're filthy, and can say actually in a pandemic they literally are potentially bringing disease. So therefore, we can push aside all of the rights that they have had in the past toward asylum and toward a legal process. Why is it, do you think, that the Biden administration has continued this practice?
I mean, I ask myself this all the time. When Kamala Harris went on stage with a right-wing leader in Guatemala and echoed the talking points of Donald Trump, talking points she ran against when she went to the border and said it was a humanitarian crisis, what was happening at the border. And then she went down to Guatemala and said, stay home. Stay home where? Under the dictator you're on stage with? I ask myself this question every single day. I mean, this is not the administration that I think so many of us thought, so many were moved to vote for because of what was happening at the crisis at the border. And I think, come midterms, if we're going to turn this around electorally, this is going to be a major problem for the midterms, because in those states that the Biden administration and Democrats are working so hard to turn blue and have a real path to turning blue, whether it's Texas or Arizona or Colorado, they were dependent on so many people who are either first generation or have actually, are DACA recipients to either vote, organize, or knock on doors in their communities to bring out, new Americans, essentially. And they have a crisis here. They have a responsibility to their voters, they have a responsibility to Americans, and they have a responsibility to the global community. Because if you're not going to stand for asylum, if you're not going to stand up against one of the worst policies, racist policies, as you said, even using this law, that they're dirty, that they could be spreading diseases, that is racist language in the law. And I think so many Americans are starting to realize that our laws and our systems are just basically racist.
Rachel, I have a slightly different concern with this, and I wondered if you might agree or what your take would be. And I assume you have, probably different immigration views as a conservative. But the administration is saying, the State Department saying, well, our hands are tied because this falls under sort of CDC powers to, I guess, set policy in every facet of life forever, which is an issue that I am increasingly concerned with, the idea that we'll just default to whatever the CDC wants. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's a good point, because we've run housing policy through CDC. We've run public school policy through CDC. CDC has very expansive authority, so it's not shocking to me that, our border control would run through CDC as well. But I think it's important to point out, Title 42, I disagree that it's an inherently racist title. It's supposed to work in pandemics, right? It's supposed to say, if the country is shutting down, we shouldn't leave our border wide open. There's a fundamental logic to it. But I would point out, too, that, regardless of whether or not Joe Biden's keeping it in place, 53% of the migrants that came over while Title 42 has been in place have been admitted. So it's not like they're turning a ton of people away under this title. And moreover, I think despite the fact that this exists, the border is out of control. I mean, you just saw 15,000 people be housed under a bridge in Texas. You have the government of Panama telling us that 60,000 more Haitian migrants are coming. The Biden administration has already lost track of 5,000 kids within HHS custody. And this is something that plagues every administration. my sympathy for Joe Biden, I don't like the finger pointing that goes on with immigration, but every president suffers from the same problems because our laws are so fundamentally broken and Congress will not fix them.
And it's so fundamentally broken that toward the end of Harold Koh's resignation letter, and by the way, Harold Koh, this is not some progressive nut job. He's famous for green-lighting the drone program under the Obama administration. This, not some peacenik who's just looking to exploit the law to in some Saul Alinsky type fashion to just open up all the borders. But as a reflection of how broken the system is, toward the end of his resignation letter, he just starts pleading for some crumbs, basically, to be thrown the way of migrants. He says, look, okay, if you're going to continue to enforce Title 42, at least rethink the way you're enforcing it toward Haitians. So right now, they're just putting people on planes and flying them back to Haiti, and they're landing in Port-au-Prince and freaking out because they spent years, many of them, escaping the violence of that situation. And so he says a couple of things. One, he says, at least ask people, if you get sent back to Haiti, is there a plausible reason that you're going to be killed very quickly? Is there a gang or some other political faction that is hunting you? And if there is, there's a legal process that you can go through. And he says, secondly, ask them if they have legal status somewhere else, because a lot of these people, almost all of them, are not coming from Haiti. They're coming from Brazil or from Colombia, and a lot of them have legal status of some sort in those countries. And so if they do, he's saying at least send them back there. And so usually when you get a resignation letter, it's filled with high-minded principle, and this one certainly is. But then it kind of finishes at the end with can we at least try to send fewer people to their immediate deaths? Nomiki, what did you do? You think that Harold Koh's plea here is going to resonate? Because he's now the second high-level official to resign over our treatment of Haitian migrants, the first being the envoy to Haiti.
I mean, it's not a good look, and it's not a good look that it had to get to this level, right? I mean, this has been a crisis, as Rachel was saying. It's not the first time the president has had to deal with this crisis, but it is definitely the worst crisis in the last 30 years. And Koh was under the Clinton administration, which was the first major crisis we had at the border. But the difference is that we didn't have for-profit, as many at least, for-profit entities making money off of there. And I think that's ultimately, the big elephant in the room here is, what is the Biden administration going to do about the continuous for-profit entities that keep seeping their way into our immigration policies, whether they're blatantly racist or just looking for an economic opportunity? And that is, I think, the issues that they're trying to disentangle themselves from this bureaucratic nightmare, while people are literally risking their lives, whether coming to the border, risking their lives, and giving up, all of the money, taking out loans locally that they're going to be beholden to, whether or not they make it to the border or not, for decades, or they're risking their lives because there's a hunt for them in where they live because of the crime rates in many of these areas. So, I think this is a bureaucratic issue, frankly, and our bureaucracy now is so tethered to for-profit industries in a neoliberal way. This is not the solution. This is not, the solution is essentially always to disentangle yourself entirely. There's no in between.
Rachel, we'll give you the last word. What needs to be done to fix this policy?
Yeah, solve
that in just a few seconds.
Well, I actually want to go back to something that Ryan mentioned, which is this idea that many of these migrants are actually not coming from Haiti necessarily. They're coming through other countries where they've had residence. A lot of them have residence cards for areas in South America. As part of the migrant protection protocol that Trump instituted, he put in that prevailing legal standard, which is the international standard called the Safe Third Country Agreement, which is that if you are coming from a country where you can claim asylum, that is the country that you should stay, where you should stay, and you are now not entitled to an asylum claim in the United States. That was an incredibly effective protocol under the Trump administration. Again, this is the international standard across Europe as well. Biden undid that, and I think we're seeing the results of when you sort of have, no stopgap measures at all on the border. You're just incentivizing major inflows of migrants, which is what we're seeing. We don't have the capacity to handle it, and it's inhumane.
But next on Rising, Matt Stoller joins to discuss Facebook's case of the Mondays. when rising continues.